Welcome to Peter's podcast, where we talk about real yoga, actual happiness, and deep living. Thanks for joining me. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Peter.
So, welcome to our first video podcast.
I feel welcomed.
Thanks. Thanks for being here. And we enjoyed talking about all of our stuff, what is colloquially known as our breakfast conversations, but it's now a dinner conversation. It's just about dinner time.
It's a dunch conversation.
Yes. And you've been talking...
That's dinner and lunch.
Yeah, you've been talking about the sutras in your workshops, and I wanted to take a minute to talk about the way the Yamas and Niyamas are considered in a more tantric perspective, because so often the Yamas and Niyamas get labeled as something like, well, these are just the 10 commandments of yoga, and they're very much not that.
Yeah.
So how do you look at what these first steps of the 8 limbs of yoga are?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm a little steeped in it right now because I'm 3 parts into a 4-part series. But my first answer, and so there's a lot to say about that subject for me. I've gone around the block with this quite a lot and thought about it quite a bit. But the first thing that I think is really important to point out and really drop into is that the Yamas and Niyamas are the first 2 limbs of practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that fact gets a little bit ignored when we sort of default into thinking about them as like preparation for practice or something that you have to master in order to be a good person, or just kind of a lot of this pre-programmed type of belief system that we in the West, and I'm sure just in a lot of parts of the world, contemporary world, are taught from the get-go. So the first step for me is really seeing it. What does it mean that it's the first 2 limbs of practice? It means it's about making there be some difference between the practice that we do and the results that we want to see and how that links up.
Yeah.
Because in yoga, the results are kind of what flows back to us from our practice that's beyond the realm of the senses in Tantra, right? In Tantra, that comes from our whole practice, our whole aligned meditation of all the 8 limbs, right?
Right.
Including our physical body, including our beyond the mind body.
Yeah.
And so we have to start to learn to see it that way. And if I could just add one more thing, it's probably too much, but if we're tantrikas thinking about what are the siddhis, the effects of our practice are the siddhis. That's what shows up. And because it's practice, we want to see how we're changing and shifting and repatterning ourselves as a siddhi, not as a goal to achieve that's going to get us merit points.
Right. Maybe I can take 1 second and...
Now that you could just unpack that.
Yeah, like the distinction of it being a practice, I think, is also worth like chewing on for a second, because a practice is something that you do regularly as a way of living. You do your practice, you do your sadhana. Sadhana is really the word for what is it that you do to keep yourself spiritually attuned. So when we say the yamas and niyamas are the first 2 limbs of practice, we're saying these are things that you do all the time. This is part of your way. So there's never a time when you've accomplished truthfulness
Right,
or you've
exactly.
accomplished, non-stealing. This is something that confronts us every day
In our,
in our interactions, in our striving, in our dealing with our past, in our, habits, etc. So the
exactly.
practice of holding these two things, these two sets of things, as a way of interacting when we're in living, sort of, it doesn't set the stage in terms of like it's a sequence of getting better at something. It sets
Right,
the stage in terms of every time you open your eyes.
right. And a good way to um, sort of drive that home is that, I don't have to master ahimsa in order to do the next thing in the sequence.
Right.
I have to be doing a practice around ahimsa all the time and seeing what ripples from that back into my living,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like we can get into like what's the difference between the yamas and the niyamas, but just to really understand what are our like mental blocks around seeing it that way.
Mm-hmm.
It is almost as if when we get into these like looking at mental and emotional patterns, which is what the yamas and niyamas are, that's the part of who we are, that they are kind of focusing on. Like if we understand that, you know, that's not divorced from the physical body. That's not divorced from the prana or from the pratyahara, right? It's part and parcel. It ripples like all through our system. Like we are one koshic system. Those things are all interwoven, you know, working together to make us who we are in the elemental field, in the world that we're living in.
Right.
So we kind of have to bring it back to what's standing in the way of our understanding that we could be working on ahimsa just like we're working on, uh, an imbalance in our hips.
Mm-hmm.
We don't go into an imbalance in our hips thinking, if I master this, then I'll be enlightened.
Then I just work on my shoulders.
Like
Yeah,
we
and then
understand
I'll be
somehow that
enlightened.
there's this process that has to happen,
Right,
and
and it's
whatever might,
ongoing.
and it's ongoing, and
Right.
what we might get somewhere.
Right.
We
Right.
might see some results, but if I attach to the results
Right.
right away,
Yeah, and another piece of this that is, I think, fruitful or useful to think about with regard to these as practice is that, um, in the sutras, it's a little bit a part of our quoting culture. We see these things. Oh, look at this cool, meme. These are the 8 limbs of what you're supposed to do, but when you read about the yamas and niyamas in the sutras and you read the next sutras, they talk about, okay, so in your way, in your living, if you do this, if you practice at this particular yama, this is what it brings into your living.
Right.
This is how it helps you.
Yeah.
Like it's the cause and effect.
That's really exactly it. Absolutely. And it's funny, we don't really in our meme world, we don't do like a what I would call like a close or introspective reading of the sutras very often, probably because we get overwhelmed by it. But in between the description of the yamas and niyamas and the description of what in the sutras it's called the gifts of, but we could call it the siddhis that arise as a result of the practice. Right in between, it gives the practice. And the practice is called pratipaksha bhavanam. And it is designed to help us shift our perspective around our patterning that causes us to be somehow in a loop around something, or stuck in something, or triggered or activated around that thing. But essentially, we all have pre-existing patterns, and there's a practice around how to shift our, right? Like we can't change our karma. We can change how we respond or react or respond to our karma.
Right.
And so there's this turnaround thing that we can do, which helps
us. Oh, you
us
mean it's not going to be like one of those emails you get where it says, "Oh, and you should do this, and here, write and
then
sign
you'll be
up."
Great, exactly.
And we're not going to tell you what it is. You're actually going to tell us what it is right now.
Am I going to tell you what it is right now?
Pratipaksha bhavanam.
Pratipaksha bhavanam. But the thing is, I can tell you what the practice is, but I can't tell you what your patterns are.
Yeah.
Right? You have to discover them.
Right.
And you have to work with them, and it's a process. And
right.
This is how we do that.
Right.
Like asana.
So let me just stop you right there, because what you just said is so key. It's not enough to say, "Oh, you should not harm others." You have to see, where do I do that? Where do I not practice ahimsa? Where am I stumbling in regard to that? And then you have to apply this method.
Where are my patterns? What are my patterns specifically? Right? And ahimsa is it's like the foundation, bedrock, root of all the rest. But continue what you were saying. Sorry.
That was it. It's like, so if you see that you are being, like, I think one that a lot of people can relate to is when you're being harmful to yourself. Like when you say, "Oh man, I suck." When you say that, the practice is not to just not have that problem, right? The practice is, I have to now turn this around. I have to practice pratipaksha bhavanam. Do you have a succinct definition for that? It's like putting in the opposite, putting in the opposite energy, right? So like, instead of that, like, how can I say, this is where Byron Katie is such a brilliant practitioner, right? Is that true? Exactly. No, I don't suck, right? How does that feel when I say that, and how do I turn that around and say something that is the opposite of that I can believe? Yeah.
So for me, it goes even a little bit more into a slightly different place, because as much as we translate pratipaksha bhavanam as bringing in the opposite energy, I really do think of it as bringing in something that shifts our relationship to the thing that's happening. That's the uncomfortable pattern in us that we're noticing, right? So, the yamas are really about being able to discover what the pattern of reactivity is. What's the belief or the reaction or the fear or the frustration or whatever that pattern is, or even like the addiction or the overly excited can't let it go reaction, right? That we're noticing is causing whatever is difficult for us, the challenge. And then looking at it like, okay, so this is what's at the heart of what's happening. And then not saying I have to turn this around and find something else I can believe, but rather I have to find a way to look at it differently. So if I wanted to shift this, what would it look like if I shifted this? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what would that look like? And that's the turnaround. Like, I would want to, I'm feeling, let's take one that's really big for me. Frustrated and rushed. I feel frustration with something. So what would I like this to look like? I'd like to feel that I have time, right? But that's only one solution that it could be, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have time to sit and figure this out, right? So that's the pratipaksha bhavanam. It's not like I want to not feel frustrated. That's
Mm-hmm.
too abstract.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what is my actual challenge? And then we start to do a practice around that, and we can look at the niyamas as things that help. So the yamas, we discover the pattern and start to deprogram it that way, start to shift it that way. And then in the niyamas, we're looking at how am I realigning? How am I creating a new pattern? How am I, over time with practice, right, with actual practice, little bit every day, shifting into a new pattern? And the niyamas help us to see what are those ways that I can do that,
Mm-hmm.
to repattern myself for the purpose of being in greater alignment with between my karma and the karma, the big karma, and
Right.
other people's karma.
Right. So, given that we have this sort of pair of things, and they're listed as the first and the second of the limbs of yoga,
Yeah.
right? They're not the same thing. They are two things that work together in the realm of our activity, right? Like asana works in the realm of our physical body. How do we do something? Pranayama works in the realm of the bridge between our physical body and our energetic body.
Yeah.
And then meditation works in the realm more of the mental and the causal bodies. And so when we're doing these things that are kind of about our relational part of living, it's pretty cool because it lets you know that the sutras understand that we are this wholeness. We are all of these experiences, which I think is why Al always thought it was a Tantra book, or a Tantra, a description of a tantric relationship with life, where we have both parts. We it's not just like meditate and get out of here.
Exactly.
Right? Which is like the go to the forest and leave it all behind. This practice is about how do you live? How do you engage with this other part of what we clearly are, what most of us spend most of our time on.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious to know how you see this sort of, like, I don't know, ratio is maybe too strong of a word, but like we obviously spend so much more time not in meditation, and yet there is something that shifts in you, which the fourth pada is all about, right?
Yeah.
That it changes the way we start out living in the world.
Yeah. Well, I think of it as kind of an ongoing cyclical type of a relationship that there's two sort of related answers. One is going inside and meditating, right? Going from the place where we're paying attention to the outside world, and we're kind of like the outside world, like this realm of the senses and time and space that we interact in all the time. It's kind of like the field that we play in, right? And when we are in that engaged place, we often forget. Our patterns become engaged in that place, and we forget to come back into our resourced container. And that's how I think of it. So, I have to come in. I have to come back in, right? And I have to use all of the 8 limbs to do it, right? Including the yamas and niyamas, because if I'm reading it right, I'm never going to remember to come back in if I'm not practicing with the yamas and niyamas. I'm just going to be fully engaged and think I'm right and be in my head. But I'm also going to be, in my body, and I'm also going to be in my breath, and I'm also going to be remembering about pratyahara and turning it in. And ultimately, I have to use my meditational, the place where I go beyond the mind, that capacity as well, to resource, to get back in. But then it's not just about that, right? So now I've just described the coming back in, but it's not just to get out of here. It's because when I come in and I do that, I get a new perspective. And now I'm going to go back out because here I am still living with my karmic patterns. So now I'm going to go out and try to relate to the same thing, cycle, but from a different, slightly different perspective that I maybe gained through that practice of really relating to the pattern that was bothering me. And now I'm going to go out and I'm going to see what's happening out there. Is it any different? Is it a little different? So I'm not attached to the outcome exactly, but I'm still holding that intention for practice.
Mm-hmm.
And it involves all 8 limbs, right? So that right there, the going back out, right? And experiencing the cities, even if they're little minor baby cities, right? The changes, the shifts. What is time and space and the sensory world and my reactions look like now, right? After doing this practice, and then bring that back into practice and go back out. So our challenges start to become really opportunities for practice all over the place. And our practice becomes something that keeps us closer to being able to remember to come back in and resource ourselves.
I think that's really, really key, because a lot of us can have an idea or a sense of, oh yeah, this is how this works. I'm supposed to do this. Or you just read the book. You just finished reading the book. Oh, that was brilliant. I get it. Right. But the remembering to apply the practice at the times when the challenges are there is the difference between a practice that's, I don't know what the right word is, but effective, and a practice that's just like on paper. It's like when one gets upset, that's the time one needs the practice, right? When
the practice can show up for you then.
Yeah.
Also.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, practicing all the time makes it possible for it to show up when you need it in those times.
Yes.
Right. And
that has been my experience. Right. Because we're not getting out of here without disturbances.
And right? I've heard a lot of students over the years say, I feel so great when I go to yoga, and then I go back in life and life sucks, or I'm having fights with so-and-so and this and that and the other thing, and so I just want to go back to yoga practice again, but that's sort of a limited view of what is yoga practice.
Yeah.
Because we need to be able to go into living and have the effect of the practice be there, which is to, and that's where the actual yamas and niyamas are so beautiful. Like as you're practicing them, as you're doing the pratipaksha bhavanam and turning things around, as you're getting the benefit of that cause and effect,
you're receiving it.
Exactly. You're also receiving the ability then to carry that with you as you go.
Right.
So like like just this very simple example is that So often we get hung up on what somebody else is doing. Like if only they would stop doing that, right? And
That's a big one.
if you can if you can then take the, the package of the yamas and niyamas that would let you interact with that in a way that is more graceful, more spacious, more pure, more honest, less harmful, all of that, right? Self-reflective, all of the yamas and niyamas, right? As you're doing the tapas to not engage, right? All of those things, then you see, oh wow, by what I did, the situation changed.
Right.
I didn't
How
need that to
I brought
change.
myself back to what this is for me
Mm-hmm.
so that I can resource myself. I can get clear on my reactions here. And then I can come back. And maybe it's not so easy to come back. Maybe it's an entrenched pattern relationally that's going to be hard to change. Okay, come back and see that.
Right.
Like,
That could be a lifetime
right? It's
practice.
not like you're exactly, but it's not like ahimsa is a lifetime practice. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Like, and that shuts down all the rest of what's going on. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't. It doesn't. Um, and there's some subtleties here that we've been really getting into in the course of these discussions in the class that I'm teaching, the workshop that I'm teaching, that are that show me and I think the people participating that it's like there are these subtleties, and it goes back to, like, I can tell you what Pratipakshabhavanam is, but I can't tell you what the specifics of your pattern are. Right? This is a place for you. This is your practice, and like you can work with your sangha and you can work with your teacher to tweeze them out and to sort of really do that self-reflection and do that ahimsa work. Oh, here's where it's me impacting other people. Here's where it's me impacting myself negatively. Here's where I'm getting self-critical, or here's where I'm getting really kind of a little bit over intense about that. Um, but ultimately, we have to kind of keep remembering what it means if I'm making it about my reactions, getting clear on understanding and repatterning my reactions, and then creating new ones in the niyamas with, via the niyamas, creating, taking that, tapas comes up in the niyamas because we need that oomph to change a pattern, right? But ultimately, it's nothing if we don't remember that it's for surrendering enough of our like narrow ego mind to be able to be in samadhi and to be understanding our relationship with the big what is, our little what is with the big what is, right? So there are these subtleties of practice, like in anything. Like if I tell you cookie cutter asana or cookie cutter pranayama, it's not respecting the breadth of individuality, and that's what makes teaching yoga both so wonderful and rewarding and just rich, and also a little frustrating
Mm-hmm.
for people who want, like, this is the sequence and this is how we do it,
Mm-hmm.
because I really want that. I really want, like, whatever, X, Y, or Z, I want to grab it.
Yeah.
So that was long answer, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think this is, like like solving a really big challenge or a really big pattern of your own. It's a lifelong practice.
Yeah.
And I think understanding these tools is also a kind of a lifelong practice. It's like you learn it one way, and then you learn something else that makes you go, oh man, I was really looking at that in a very narrow way. It's like
Yeah.
this, right? Like the first time I heard that, oh, there are gifts that come from doing these, I was
Mm-hmm.
like, holy crap, that makes them seem so much more logical
Yeah.
why you're doing this, right? And so the more we work with the tools, the more they become embodied in
Yeah.
our energy, and we use them more effectively.
Yeah. And it helps us to come back to that, whatever that part of our practice that's really meaningful for us. Like if meditation is your thing, then you're helping your meditation. If asana is your thing, you're helping your asana. You know, if whatever, working on your vritti is your thing, well, then you're working right in that sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it.
Yeah.
And so thanks for being here and doing this, and
Yeah.
look forward to the next time.
Yeah.
All right.
See ya in the kitchen.
Namaste.